Have you ever stepped into a street in Southeast Asia and felt, for a split second, like you had been dropped into downtown Los Angeles, only to realize that your senses were lying to you? That's exactly what happened to Oliver James, a 52-year-old urban designer from Atlanta, Georgia. He had flown across the Pacific, expecting palm trees, noisy tricycles, and rustic streets that smelled like fried garlic and diesel fumes. He wasn't prepared for this. He was holding his phone up to the sky, framing the perfect shot of concrete shapes against the morning light, when his brain began to wrestle with what his eyes were seeing: sleek glass towers that seemed to scratch the clouds, art installations that came alive in LED colors after sunset, coffee shops where delivery robots rolled quietly past his knees, roads so smooth they looked ironed, electric vehicles gliding by without a whisper, solar-powered transit hubs. And yet, just 2 blocks away, tricycles purred in the shade, a barefoot child chased a basketball, and a mother stood by a tiny sari-sari store, rosary beads slipping between her fingers as she prayed with her eyes closed. "Wait," Oliver muttered under his breath. "This is Manila? I thought I booked a trip to the Philippines, not to the future." That was his first morning in Bonifacio Global City. BGC, as the locals call it. But Oliver didn't know that this was just the beginning. The skyscrapers would amaze him, sure. But something else was going to humble him. Something you can't capture in a photo. At first, Oliver's awe was the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't make your jaw drop, but makes your chest tighten. The kind that makes you feel small in a way that's almost holy. Everything he had heard about Manila before was wrong. Back home, at conferences, his fellow architects spoke about the city with half smiles and polite chuckles. Poor but happy, they said, rustic, behind the times. Yet here he was, in a place that felt like a secret, like Manila had been quietly hiding a part of itself from the world. For 2 hours that morning, Oliver walked alone. He noticed details like a detective: high-speed fiber lines overhead, 5G signals that never dropped, drones drifting above landscaped gardens, a Japanese-inspired co-living space with an AI concierge. It was more advanced than most of Miami. And still, there were jeepneys on the side of the road. Not the old, smoke-belching kind he'd seen in travel documentaries. These were reborn, electric, gleaming, reimagined. Street vendors scanned QR payments on their phones. Teenagers switched between English and Tagalog without thinking, balancing Halo Hollow in one hand and laptops in the other. It was modernity and tradition sitting at the same table, and both seemed comfortable with it. At lunch, Oliver met Miguel, a young architect from Quezon City. He was sharp, clean-cut, with a way of speaking that made every sentence sound like a carefully placed chess piece. "Do you think we look like America?" Miguel asked, almost casually. Oliver laughed. "I don't know. It feels like a cleaner California." Miguel smiled, but then leaned in. "That's the problem. We were never trying to be America." The words hit Oliver harder than he expected. He realized, painfully, that he had arrived with a quiet bias. Like so many Western designers, he had unconsciously thought of Southeast Asia as a copycat, imitating, learning, never leading. But what if he had it backwards? Miguel went on, "Our design philosophy isn't about dominance, it's about dignity. We want a future where tech helps us stay more Filipino, not less." Oliver stayed silent, because deep down, he understood. In the West, the future often meant cold, sterile spaces, efficient, yes, but stripped of soul. Here, the future smelled like adobo. It sounded like laughter drifting from open windows. Jeepneys and LED billboards shared the same street without irony. That night, Oliver sat on the rooftop of his condo and looked down at the glowing veins of the city. He thought of how many people back home had no idea this existed, how easy it was to believe progress only had one face: steel, glass, and a Western accent. But Manila didn't feel like an echo of New York. It felt like a prophecy. And this prophecy wasn't just about buildings. It was about pride, about a country that was growing without losing itself. The next morning began quietly. No neon lights, no traffic roar, just the rustle of trees along High Street as Oliver walked barefoot across dew-damp tiles. He hadn't planned to wake early, but something in him was restless. He stopped at a cafe, not for the coffee, but for the music. Kundaman floated from vintage speakers, clear and warm. A young man in a hoodie was tending to potted plants by the window, humming along. "You know this song?" Oliver asked. The boy nodded. My grandfather sang it every morning. There was weight in his voice, not sadness, but something like inheritance. Later, Oliver visited Intramuros, the old walled city. He wanted to see the Manila without glass towers. That's where he met Rosario. Late 60s, plain blouse, umbrella against the heat. She was a volunteer storyteller, giving free history tours 6 days a week. "Why do you do this?" Oliver asked. She smiled. "Because if we don't tell our own story, someone else will tell it for us." She walked him through centuries-old ruins, churches rebuilt from ash, courtyards that once sheltered whispered prayers during the Japanese occupation. But what stayed with him wasn't the history. It was how she told it. Every stone seemed to have a name. Every crack had dignity. "People think modern means forgetting the past," Rosario said, brushing her hand against a battered Spanish gate. "The real power is knowing who you are and then building on top of that." At lunch, Oliver sat under an old acacia tree, sipping coconut juice handed to him by a street vendor. When he reached for his wallet, the woman laughed. "Just drink, sir, it's hot today." It was a small thing, but it pierced him. No app, no algorithm, just kindness. And that's when it clicked. Despite all the AI taxis, fiber internet, and futuristic skylines, this city still had something no machine could replicate: the Filipino spirit. A pulse, a generosity. A way of carrying joy and grief in the same breath. That afternoon, Oliver met Miguel again for a site visit in Pasig. But before they left, he asked quietly, "Why does it feel like I've been lied to about the Philippines?" Miguel didn't even blink. "Because the world only talks about us when we're in pain. Typhoons, corruption, poverty. No one wants to see us winning. It's not the story they're used to." And Oliver knew. Miguel was right. He'd sat in boardrooms where decisions about developing nations were made with casual detachment. He'd heard colleagues say, "They're not ready," as if readiness could be measured only by GDP. But here, standing in a city that had learned how to be modern without losing its memory, he realized he wasn't just seeing the Philippines, he was seeing the future. He had been one of those voices, one of those people who, without meaning to, fed into the same shallow narratives about places he had never truly seen. But here in this living, breathing, radiant city, Oliver was witnessing something no report, no article, no international quality of life index could ever prepare him for. Manila wasn't waiting for validation. It wasn't asking permission. It was quietly becoming something no one had expected. That evening, they visited a new site, a sustainable village project created through a rare partnership between seasoned engineers and local barangay leaders. From the outside, it didn't look like BGC's futuristic skyline. It wasn't about glass or chrome. It was built with bamboo beams and solar technology, but also with Capiz shell windows and hand-woven panels made by local artisans. It felt warmer, softer, more human. That's where Oliver met Teresa, a young engineer from the University of the Philippines. She had the kind of mind that lit up when she explained things, and a heart that didn't seem to separate science from soul. She led him to a simple, elegant solar panel system designed for low-income homes. "We want to prove," she said, her voice steady, "that even the poorest Filipino deserves to live in beauty." Those words went through him like a bell. Not just dignity, beauty. Not just survival, grace. By the end of the day, Oliver couldn't stop thinking about it. Beauty, not just efficiency. Grace, not just profit. Faith, not just science. He had come to Manila expecting a spectacle of modernity. Instead, he was watching an entire nation reimagine progress, not in spite of its people, but because of them. The skyscrapers were never the point. The soul behind them was. 3 days into his trip, Oliver found himself far from the polished steel and glowing facades of Bonifacio Global City. Now he was walking down a narrow road in Pateros. The paint on the houses peeled in places, but the light pouring out of the windows was warm and alive. Roosters crowed. Children ran barefoot. The scent of sinigang curled out from a kitchen somewhere down the lane. This felt like the old Manila he had always heard about. And yet, modern touches had quietly made their way here too. Solar panels on rooftops, community Wi-Fi hubs powered by microgrids, a barangay center run by volunteer mothers and retired engineers. The future wasn't just in the towers. It was here, in the corners, in the cracks, being rebuilt from the ground up. Oliver wasn't here for architecture today. He had been invited, unexpectedly, to a town fiesta. He almost said no. He didn't want to intrude, but Teresa had insisted, "You can't understand Manila until you've danced in its heart." When he arrived, the streets were already blooming with color. Buntings fluttered from every post. Children in angel costumes rehearsed their lines for a small play. Lolas balanced trays of kakanin on their heads. Teenagers practiced dance routines on the basketball court, half shy, half proud. And in the center, a makeshift altar. Flowers. Candles. The Santo Niño, its face worn smooth by decades of devotion, smiling softly. Oliver stood there for a moment, just watching. Neighbors greeted each other with embraces. Old men sang Harana under the shade of trees. Laughter poured from open windows. No one cared about his camera or his accent. Someone pressed a plate of pancit into his hands. Someone else slipped a tiny paper flag into his pocket. Then, the sky opened. Not a storm, just that soft, moody Manila rain that turns the streets into mirrors. Oliver thought people would scatter for cover. Instead, something remarkable happened. They danced, barefoot, laughing, faces tilted to the gray sky. No stage, no choreography, just a whole neighborhood moving together like they shared a rhythm the rest of the world had forgotten. Oliver stood frozen, his chest tight, his eyes stung. It was so raw, so pure. This, he realized, was modernity too. Not the kind you measured in GDP or glass towers, but the kind that lived in resilience, in joy, in community. When the rain eased into a warm mist, Oliver was welcomed into a small home. The family didn't speak much English. They didn't ask questions. They didn't try to impress him. They simply offered him a towel, a seat, a steaming bowl of arroz caldo. He sat quietly, the sound of rain still dripping from the eaves, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, belonging. His eyes wandered to a small altar in the corner. Mary, Joseph, the Santo Niño, a candle burning low. It was the kind of faith that doesn't shout but somehow holds entire families together. That's when it hit him. The real difference in Manila wasn't the tech. It wasn't the architecture. It was the invisible thread that tied everything together. Faith. Not just religious faith, though that was everywhere, but faith in each other. Faith that even if the world forgot them, they wouldn't forget themselves. Faith that beauty was worth building. That kindness was worth preserving. That no matter how modern they became, they would never leave behind the things that made them them. Oliver left that night changed. Not because he had seen something spectacular, but because he had seen something true. As he rode the Grab back to his hotel, his clothes damp, his shoes heavy with rain, he looked out the window and whispered to himself, "This is not America." He smiled. "This is something better." The final day came without fanfare. No tours. No site visits. Just Oliver sitting at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, his luggage stacked neatly beside him, a thick notebook resting on his lap. He had been writing since dawn, sketches, fragments of conversations, questions that didn't have answers. Something about this city had reached past his training and his intellect, straight into something softer, something Western life had almost squeezed out of him, soul. He thought of everything he had seen, the ultramodern skyline, the sustainable village in Pasig, the fiesta under the rain, Rosario's voice in Intramuros, Miguel's unapologetic pride, Teresa's quiet, revolutionary hope, the grandmother who pressed a handkerchief into his hand during Mass, the street vendor who refused payment, smiling, "God provides." It all fit together like stained glass, messy up close, but radiant when you step back. Oliver stared at his boarding pass. Singapore, then Atlanta. But his heart wasn't going anywhere. He opened his phone and found an email draft he had written days earlier, addressed to the design firm he had co-founded. The firm he had poured 2 decades into. He hesitated, then pressed send. He told them he was taking an indefinite leave, not because he was burned out, but because he had seen something here he couldn't unsee. A different model. A future not obsessed with scale, but with soul. As the boarding call echoed, Oliver looked around the lounge. Dozens of Filipinos preparing to fly out, OFWs, students, families. Each one carried something invisible, like ambassadors of a truth the world still didn't understand. Modernity, he realized, wasn't the absence of poverty. It was the presence of dignity. It was the way the Philippines had chosen to grow, one foot in the future, one hand always reaching back for its neighbor. Oliver rose from his seat, not because it was time to go, but because it was time to begin again. As he walked toward the gate, He whispered the words that had been following him all week. "This isn't America." Then he smiled, a tear warming the corner of his eye. "This is the Philippines." And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't just feel inspired. He felt home. If this story moved you like it moved Oliver, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who still thinks they already know the Philippines, because maybe they've only seen half the picture. And if you believe, like we do, that progress doesn't mean losing who we are, then hit like, subscribe, and join us in rediscovering the heart of the Filipino spirit. This is not just a channel. This is home.